Thus far, I've made videos on both what I perceive to be the most nonsensical and the worst Nen abilities we have had the dis/pleasure of seeing in the series. This time around, let's discuss what I personally consider to be some of the more underrated Nen abilities, specifically for combat. By this, I mean those abilities that people don't usually bring up when they think of particularly combat-potent abilities, or that don't come up as often when powerful abilities are discussed, either because we've seen them being used only once or twice against unimpressive opponents, or because they've never been used in combat at all. Keep in mind, I'm mostly looking at abilities in isolation and am mostly not taking into account how combat capable or otherwise skillful their users are. Though, since most abilities are created by their users for the specific purpose of complementing their particular skill sets, that's not always possible, as the first entry on this list will make clear. With that said, let's get into it. Let's kick things off with an ability I feel obligated to start this list with, since I underrated it so much that I included it in my top 10 worst Nen abilities video. I am of course talking about none other than Chiu's very much impromptu crossbow and claws Hatsu. Don't get me wrong, I'm not here to sing its praises or claim it's actually secretly overpowered. I'm not saying the ability is great, but it's at least much more decent than both I, in the aforementioned video, or Moral, in World, gave it credit for. See, the problem with the crossbow part of the ability is that Chiu created an attack far slower than he himself could move, making it borderline useless for someone as quick as him. However, as a commenter by the username Zerker102 pointed out, there was a genuinely strategically sound way Chiu's ability could have been utilized. Instead of just firing the bolt at Moral and laughing like a jackass, he could have loosed it, circled Moral in an instant, and then attacked from behind with the claws, while the arrow threatened to pierce him from the front. One of the biggest issues with Chiu is his lack of pure offensive power, which the claws, as a conjured object scaling directly to Chiu's conjuration proficiency and potency, would have substantially increased. Again, I'm not saying it would have worked against Moral or that it would have been an instance of strategic brilliance, but its capacity to be used for combat was literally underrated by both Moral and Chiu, as well as myself. By pretty much everyone, but for Zerker102, actually. As such, I think it deserves a spot on this list on that basis alone. Next, let's move on to Nov and his ability, Scream. Scream is the offensive application of Nov's hide-and-seek ability, allowing him to create a portal to his pocket dimension between his hands, envelop something in it, close it, and have whatever was enveloped be teleported away and effectively obliterated from real space. Now, I know people have discussed the offensive potential of this ability and its capacity for potentially one-shotting characters with enormous levels of durability, namely powerful enhancers like Uvogin or Finks, or naturally nigh-indestructible entities like Meruem. Togashi-sensei has seemingly gone out of his way to stay away from the typical shonen power-scaling tropes of a character with a certain hack's ability not being able to affect another simply because they lack the raw power to do so. Think Soifon's two-hit kill Shikai not working on Aizen thanks to the massive difference in spiritual pressure between the two, or characters in One Piece being able to avoid or mitigate certain paramecia effects through the power of their haki, with Law being unable to fully utilize his room against Kaido or Big Mom. Going by everything we know and have on record thus far, Nov's Scream, supposing he can actually hit his opponent with it, means instant death for anyone that can't regenerate vital organs. As I said though, this is something that has been discussed before. However, a facet of Scream that I've never seen discussed is that apart from being the ultimate spear, Scream should also function as the ultimate shield against any and all physical or aura-based attacks that aren't trigger-based, like Misei's cross game, or that cover a large area, like Phaeton's Rising Sun. As long as he has Scream active, he can just send away any projectiles that come his way, and any melee attack against him means a severed limb in the best case scenario. Based on what little we've seen from it and the established world building, Scream should definitely be one of the most powerful and terrifying abilities seen in the series thus far, making its name quite appropriate. Next, we have Melody's Melody. It's one of those abilities that we've seen a bunch of times by now that has yet to receive an official name. Melody has the capacity to fully enchant anyone who hears her song for up to 3 whole minutes. In a Nen fight, that's a literal eternity. But we don't have to go to such extremes at all. A second or two is all an experienced Nen user would need to end a fight, either by taking out the opponent themselves or by opening up an opportunity for their ally to do so. Please note I never specified, I'm exclusively talking about one-on-one scenarios. Now, I'm not saying the ability is as good offensively as something like Scream can potentially be in an outright 1v1. I'm just saying that in the hands of someone more combat capable than Melody, it would be a very dangerous and potent ability, not to even emphasize its utility as a support ability in case of a group battle. While it's true that the effects of the Melody can be blocked by simply covering your ears, and we know that mid to high tier combatants like the Phantom Troop members all have either near or even faster than sound reaction speeds, you still need to have some indication that a sonic based attack is coming in order to be able to react in time, such as the troop did when Uvo inhaled for his enhanced yell. And even if someone did see his opponent suddenly take out a musical instrument and start playing, if he chooses to cover his ears to avoid a potential ability activation, he's leaving himself wide open. It's a bit of a catch-22 in that you either choose not to cover your ears and risk fulfilling the condition for a sound-based ability to trigger, or you use both hands to cover your ears and risk getting physically hurt. Keep in mind that, for example, Bonolanov's Jupiter is also a sonic-based Hatsu, but one that isn't concerned with whether or not his opponent can actually hear his battle cantabulate. So the na can't hear you weakness of Melody's ability may not be something most opponents would immediately jump to. Furthermore, the enormous potential range and scope of the Melody means that the ability can be launched from hundreds of meters away, and or while the user is hidden behind or obscured by structures, mist, darkness, or anything else, really. It can even affect people through speakers, like it did on the Black Whale. Now, I'm sure sensing bloodlust in their immediate vicinity, which is essentially a necessity when someone goes for the kill in the world of Hunter x Hunter, would probably rile awake the person targeted by said bloodlust. But by the time that happens, in the majority of cases, it would already be too late. If you can hear and don't have indication that a sonic-based attack is coming, you're as good as dead in the majority of cases. Fourth, we have Best Girl Machi and her Hatsu, which allows her to transmute her aura to mimic the properties of threads. This is an extremely versatile ability both in and out of combat, and the more I thought about it, the more the various ways it could be used in battle specifically came to mind. The threads could be used to restrict an opponent's movements by either partially or completely restraining them. They could be utilized to puppeteer people to act as a distraction, hurl objects at people from long range and at various angles, attach the thread to a target to keep track of their movements, reposition the user in an instant, create a defensive perimeter around the user to trap opponents who manage to get too close, almost in an instant mend certain types of injuries, and so on. Since the threads are transmuted, this means that in can be applied to them to make them invisible. And if you think Kurapika inning his chains was dangerous, imagine how difficult it would be to keep track of not only the dozens borderline invisible threads attacking you, but also the literally invisible ones. By the way, a thread's strength is inversely proportional to its length, and a single thread that's a meter long can hold a ton. And what seems to be a single 2-meter thread was enough to totally restrain Owl, meaning that unless the opponent is a power type enhancer like Uvogin or Finks, or an enhancement adjacent physical specimen like Silva or Bisky, 3 or 5 shorter threads should be enough to restrain the vast majority of opponents. As far as I'm concerned, this is maybe among the top 5 and definitely among the top 10 most versatile Hatsu we've seen. Last and somewhat least, Number 5. Leorio's emitted punch. Now, this one is slightly cheating, hence why I'm putting it last. It's cheating because while we did get a chance to see Leorio using the ability, we've only been told about and not actually shown its other potential applications and variations. Even worse, this wasn't told to us by the original user of the ability, namely Leorio, but by the guy he shoryukened from across the room. See, Jing believes, and this assumption is almost certain to be true since it's coming from a guy that would give Sherlock frickin' Holmes a run for his money, that Leorio's emitted punch is actually an offshoot of a broader emission-based ability, which would allow him to emit his Nen in an ultrasound-like fashion and then launch precise emitted attacks to destroy hard-to-reach clots and tumors. Now, while I know some of you don't share my take on this, I am of the firm opinion that just firing off simple Nen bullets, such as Franklin and Blaster do, makes for a really good, if really simple, ability. The unbeatable range and raw destructive power basic emission-based projectiles allow for cannot be understated. As such, it's my humble opinion that if Leorio's Hatsu is properly adapted for combat, it would make for a reasonably potent and versatile Hatsu, for the very reasons Jing demonstrated. Leorio's ability wouldn't just be capable of launching aura-based projectiles akin to Franklin and Blaster, but would also allow him to use his ultrasound-like waves to pinpoint the location of an opponent obstructed by smoke or hidden behind cover, and then launch a series of projectiles or emitted punches at various angles through the smoke or the wall itself. Jing noted that the aura ultrasound is much more difficult to detect than N, meaning that most opponents would be caught off guard, believing they've got the upper hand or the element of surprise. As an enhancement lean emitter, this means Leorio would be very well suited for both melee and ranged combat, while having decent utility. Now, I'm quite aware this is arguably the weakest entry on this list, but as soon as it came to mind, I knew I had to include it in here. Not only because Leorio is seen as the weakest among our 4 main boys, which fair, he very much is, but also because I was genuinely impressed with the potential combat applications of Leorio's Hatsu as Jing showcased. If one of the most elite Nen users in the known world is inspired by and chooses to implement your ability, it should not be underestimated. And that's that. What abilities would you have included? There were a few other contenders, but I decided to zero in on these 5. If we manage to come up with 5 more, I'd consider making a part 2, though I guess the next natural step is covering the top 5 best or top 5 most overrated Nen abilities. We'll see. As always, thank you very much for watching, your feedback is always appreciated, subscribe if you like more content like this. I'd like to very much thank Kamaswami and Matt B for going the extra mile in supporting the channel, and I'll see you in the next one.